Good morning. It is good to be with you on this morning when it is trying to rain outside, which is a lot of what we've seen around Pittsburgh this spring and summer. But what a joy it is to be with you all this morning as we hear from our distinguished alum. I would just remind you what we're going to do for the morning, the schedule for today and for the morning. We will have our presentations by the Distinguished Alumni, 3 of them, and we'll give them about 15 minutes to do their presentations. And I'd ask that you hold any of your questions because we're going to let all 3 of them speak in order. And then at the end of the 3rd presentation, then if you have questions, then you can address them to any of the speakers that you want or to the whole panel. We are against a little bit of a time limit. We have to watch our time because at 11:30 you're invited over to chapel for our 4th alum awardee, the Reverend Kendra Buckwalter Smith will be leading us in worship over in the chapel. Then at noon, we will go over to the dining room where we had the meal last night for some fellowship time together. And then back here in this room and also on the live stream at 1 o'clock, we'll be meeting with the Reverend Dr. Bonnie Thurston, who was our professor of New Testament here at the seminary, and she will be giving us a talk on Mary, the mother of Jesus, after the angel departed, and we'll close the afternoon with a reception and book signing with her. So that's how the day is going to get shaped up, and before we turn this over to our presenters, let us open with a word of prayer. Gracious and Holy Spirit, we thank you for calling us together this morning. It is inspiring for us to hear the message of ministry and how we live out your story of love in our lives. And we look to our alumni to help us to understand where we fit in the great story that ran from and runs from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation, that runs from the story of the Exodus and the people of Israel to our own Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, to the founding of churches in the book of Acts. And we find ourselves on that same timeline, whether it's proclaiming a message of liberation or encountering you on the road to Emmaus, having our eyes opened when you break the bread for us, or in working in churches and founding new churches and finding places where we can be with you corporately and share in the fellowship. We ask you to be with us in this time, and we give you thanks and praise this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So our first speaker is our distinguished alumna in pastoral ministry, the Reverend Dr. Sheila Johnson, and I would invite Dr. Johnson to give us her presentation.
I am excited about sharing a couple things about my journey. Most of it will be focused on formed by community. I have divided into 3 parts: the leader, the mentor, the pioneer. As we move forward, one thing that I'd like for you to, I moved forward too fast that time. Okay, my journey? Okay, those are the areas we're gonna touch on, and I do say touch. Now, Sheila is a born leader. This was told to my mother. I was but 4 years old. And the lady was our pastor's wife. And she went to my mother. I was standing right there. I remember it because she said words that I didn't understand. I was about 4. And she said to my mother, "Sheila is a born leader." I didn't know what a leader was. I was just 4 years old, but I knew it was something important, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And then as I grew a little bit, I got into child evangelism. That's what we called it. All I called it was, my friends at school, my friends in the neighborhood. Every Monday at the church at 4 o'clock, they all gathered. We did arts and crafts. We sang a song. And then we had 2 cookies and a cup of juice. And so what I told them, they said, "Well, why everybody's going over there to the church?" I said, "Because we have 2 cookies and a cup of juice." And so I began to talk to my other friends and say, "Hey, go with me at 4 o'clock when we get out of school so that we can have 2 cookies and a cup of juice." And so then one of the things that happened, so we had this little group of people that were in my classes that joined the other 40 young kids after school. And then I remember one day someone was picking on this other kid on the playground at school during right after lunch. And so a fight broke out. It's not like it is today. Today, if a fight breaks out, everybody gets their camera up and they're videotaping it, and some of them are doing it live and all that kind of stuff. No. I came up in a different era. A fight broke out, everybody just stands back, don't want to get involved, looking to see where the teacher is, because you don't want the teacher to think that you had anything to do with the fight. Okay, so a fight broke out on the playground. And what I did was I said, "Somebody stop the fight. Somebody stop the fight." No one stopped the fight. So I stepped in to stop the fight. I was pulling this one female off of this other female, and I felt somebody pulling my back. And I'm like, did this, and then I kept on pulling them apart. And I found out when I turned around, it was my teacher. I'm like, "I'm not fighting. I'm just trying to stop the fight. I'm just trying to stop the fight." And so that, in terms of being the peacemaker, that's the first time I realized that it was important to me that people got along. And then finally, I moved on in, I think it was the 3rd grade. And what happened was Mr. Brennan, who was the first chair of the Dayton Philharmonic Orchestra, and at that time I didn't know what an orchestra was because I was like, a little kid, and so he came around and he was playing the violin. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that. And so I began to play the violin because I wanted to be an orchestral conductor, just from that little incident of hearing him. And I was like, someday I'm going to sound like Mr. Brennan. And then I talked to some additional friends, and one of my friends started playing the flute. Another one started playing the cello. So I was overjoyed because my friends were a part of the orchestra just like myself. Finally, I get to high school. And in high school, I had an unusual situation in high school at that day and time. 90% of those in my high school at that time were Jewish. And we had about 2% Asian, and then maybe 1% in terms of African Americans, and all the rest were people from all over the world. And so it was like different for me because I knew one thing, that there were Jewish holidays and we didn't have tests on them. So I appreciated that community for that. And so it caused me to stretch myself culturally in ways that I never thought or imagined. And it ended up, I became involved in our student council, involved in the choir, involved in a large assortment of student activities. And yes, I was elected in terms of vice president of our class and all that kind of thing. In all of those different organizations, I became very active in them. And that word again appeared, leader. From there, I had a strong desire to help other people to, number one, discover their gift, and number two, just do it. Just do it. It's not like, I was in Girl Scouts, and in Girl Scouts, we had this little sash. If you cook, you got a cooking sash. And then in terms of camping, you got another sash. And so the whole idea was to fill up your sash with all of these activities that you had experienced. For me, the thing was, in terms of mentoring, I always felt, later in life, I discovered this. I always have a mentor that is older than I am. I also, in terms of mentor someone who is my peer, and then I also mentor others who are younger than myself. And so the thing that was very important to me is that I didn't want to make mistakes that others had already made. I wanted to learn from their mistakes and make new mistakes. So that whole idea, older, peer, and younger. In fact, I remember distinctly where that came from. I was at InterVarsity Christian Fellowship when I was in college, and that's one of the things that stuck to me. And also the mentorship of leaders. I have this heart that as you look at my journey in terms of if I am in leadership, I'm constantly training 3 people behind me so that when I go on to the next thing, you got 3 to pick from. If you don't pick any of them, that's your problem, not mine. And then in terms of that whole idea of connecting not only the spirituality of the person in terms of the mentorship, but inclusive of social and emotional care. I think that is vitally important. Finally, we get to the end, I think. I believe in being a pioneer. I know I am a pioneer. I used to wonder, why is it that I'm different? And why is it that I'm either starting something or fixing something that is jacked up? And then it finally hit me. One day I was reading about Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. And when I was in college, I was on the lecture and music committee in student activities, and she came to our campus. What happened was the person that was supposed to pick her up in Nashville, at Nashville International Airport, had gotten sick. So they called me and told me to pick her up. So I'm like a nervous wreck. I was like, well, what am I gonna say? So I had written down topics to talk about, while we're coming from the airport. And so she asked me what I was doing, what degree, what my experiences were. I was like, she got a lot of questions. This is just a half an hour ride. And she's like, I feel like I'm on a witness stand or something. And so she said things to me like, I said, I have my master's degree. She said, that's not enough, you need a PhD. I said, okay. I wasn't thinking about a PhD. And so then it was a lot of things that she kept on just saying. And so when I got to my apartment, I wrote everything down. And then I pondered it, and then I prayed over it. And then here it is now, something that she said in the car. I have 2 doctorates instead of just a master's. all because of that whole interaction with a pioneer. So I was a pioneer in a lot of things in high school, in college, in my young professional, in my seasoned professional life. In ministry, you already heard about me being the first African American female president of the Baptist Ministers Conference of Pittsburgh and vicinity. In music, I am a little eclectic because I get bored easily. So I've written like movements and symphonies, but yet I also have done some jazz fusion, gospel, all that kind of thing. And so that's my journey. What else I have here? Oh, ministry. It always seems to be evangelistic from a child. Social action in terms of the creating of social change, emotional and transformational, breaking the chains that bind people, And so basically, that's my journey. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you so very much for sharing your journey with us. We really appreciate that. Our next speaker is the Distinguished Alum in Specialized Ministry, the Reverend Dr. N. Graham Standish.
Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate it. I am so glad to be here. I said this last night. I actually don't get nervous when I give talks. And my heart has been racing for the past 36 hours. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you. Also, I will tell you, I haven't stood behind a podium in 35 years. So forgive me for walking around and giving a talk. Before I kind of talk about what I do and what I've been doing, I want to tell you about how I got here. Now, I'm going to tell a story that I've told a lot, and there are a number of you who've heard me tell this story before, so this gives you an opportunity to take a really quick nap, and I will tell you to wake up when I am done. I actually walked away from the church when I was 15 with the intention that I was never coming back. At 15, I called myself spiritual but not religious. I feel a lot of resonance for the people in our culture who not only are spiritual but not religious, but the nuns, the duns, and I don't know if you know there's a new category called the ums. They've come about since the pandemic. They're not necessarily against church, but they stepped away, and they're kind of like, why aren't you going to church? And they're kind of like, So what got me eventually to come to seminary was a patient of mine when I was working in a psychiatric hospital in Virginia. I was working with adolescents and children, and I had a patient who was doing terribly. We thought he was going to a long-term facility. There's a lot of detail I'm leaving out of this, but we thought he was going to a long-term facility. I was his primary therapist, which meant I was doing counseling with him every single day. And there was one day I came in and he was kind of smiling. And he said, I want to talk to you about something, but you have to promise me you're not going to just tell me I'm crazy. And I made that promise, which, well, doesn't really matter. He then said, I saw Jesus in the window. Now, when you're working in a psychiatric hospital and somebody says, I saw Jesus in the window, you're supposed to tell them some nice form of, well, that's because you're crazy. You don't say it that way. It won't help them. And everybody else had just said, this is part of your illness and all. And I don't know why, but something in me got me to explore with him, well, what was Jesus doing and what was Jesus saying? And without giving the details, although the details are really quite remarkable, my guidance to him, which was really against what the psychiatrist had said, the group therapist had said, was, I think you need to listen to what Jesus is guiding you to do. And the remarkable thing was, over the next ensuing 2.5 weeks, he got better. And we ended up discharging him to home. And I saw his father a year later in the Tanglewood Mall in Roanoke, Virginia. And his father said, you know, he made a beeline to me and he said, Graham, I just want to tell you, what you guys did was miraculous. He said, we didn't send him to his old school, but he finished up at this school and he got straight A's, and he's now about to be a freshman at Virginia Tech. And he just said, whatever you did, it was amazing. And it bugged me because I kind of felt like, yeah, we did a lot. I may be the greatest therapist in the world, but I'm only 24, so I don't know. But I did think, I think it's Jesus. And I don't know what to think about Jesus because I've walked away from the church. It eventually led me to come back to Pittsburgh. I joined a church, and 8 months later, I was here at Pittsburgh Seminary, not so I could become a pastor, but because I wanted to get my master's in social work at the University of Pittsburgh, which was one of the best programs in the country, and they had this joint program where I could learn how to deal with spiritual issues that come up in counseling. And through that, mysteriously, even though I told my father, look, I'm going to seminary to help my counseling, I will never be a pastor, by the end of it, I sensed I was called to become a pastor. Now, the reason why I start with that story, not only because it tells you a lot about me, because I am passionate about God experiences. Sheila just talked to you about a bunch of them, but I am passionate about the experience and the connection with God. But that experience also revealed to me that I have a gift and I have a curse, and they are the exact same thing. The gift is, I often passionately feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. The gift is that I am willing to go out there and find people who do know what they're doing, and to learn from them, to read from them, but that's also my curse. I not only got my master's in social work and my master's in divinity, but I went on to get a PhD at Duquesne in spiritual formation. And I have intensively studied organizational psychology, leadership, brain structure, all sorts of different kinds of counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychodynamic therapy, narrative therapy, ACT, all of these kinds of things. But I continue to look at these things to find ways to integrate that stuff in to everything I've been doing. But that's also the curse. And you may feel a little bit like this. When you pursue that stuff, you don't always fit in. Because everybody else is thinking kind of the same way, and you've had this education, this challenge in opening up to other things. And it makes you feel like a misfit. Like, where do I fit in? I'm Presbyterian, but I don't fit. But I don't fit there, and I don't fit there, and I don't fit there, and I don't fit out of it either. But it has a lot to do with what my career has been. As a result, my career has been both a joy and a struggle. The joy is I consistently see God all the time, every single day. The struggle is it's hard for me to share what my experiences have been, especially when they don't fit where everybody else is. For example, Presbyterians, we live in our heads. We just do. What happens when you have an experience that doesn't fit with somebody's head? What do you do with stuff like that? And this is what's going on all over the place. People have experiences of God all the time, but they don't fit necessarily our categories. They may not even fit a Christian category. Do we just tell them they're crazy? Like my patient? Or do you say God's doing something with them? When I was working my internship for the school of social work, I was working as a drug and alcohol therapist in Washington County. It's actually where I met my wife. And my wife has told me, when you tell this story, continue to add, because we were both students at Pitt. And we were in our internship together, because I often leave it there, and then people go, you dated one of your clients? It's like, no, we were both working together. But I had a supervisor who consistently said to me, Graham, you're going to have to choose whether you're going to be a pastor or whether you're going to be a therapist. You cannot be both. And I would say to her, why? And she said, because the world just doesn't work that way. You have to be this or you have to be this, but you cannot be both. Fortunately, I didn't agree with her, so I haven't been both. I have been both. I never did choose one or the other, but instead what I discovered, a very integrated way of doing ministry that became part not only of the churches that I led, but also a part of the work that I do now. I discovered an integrated way that really integrates theology and spirituality and organizational development, leadership, mainline understanding, evangelical understanding, non-denominational, Pentecostal, Catholic, Orthodox, counseling, generational studies. I was doing generational studies back in the late 90s to try to understand. And actually, interesting thing, we did a renovation of our sanctuary in 2000. And we said we're never going to be able to reach Gen X, but eventually we will be able to reach the millennials. And interestingly enough, when the millennials started having kids, all of a sudden, a lot of them started coming to our church, people like Rich, who you know, and a bunch of other the people that Caroline knows. There's a really great reporter named Gillian Tett. She's an interesting person herself. She's a New York Times reporter who has a PhD in anthropology, and she started out as an anthropologist. She wrote a fantastic book called The Silo Effect. And she says declining organizations, companies, whatever they are, often they decline because they become siloed. They stay in one particular area of understanding, and they do not branch out. And I realize that's our struggle. In the mainline church, the Presbyterian church, we tend to stay in our lanes, and we tend to be inspired by the people who are still doing the same things we've always done. We struggle to reach outside of it. I think one of the reasons why the churches that I've led and the nonprofit that I've led, the reason why they've grown is because we integrated things from outside. For 22 years, I was at Calvin Presbyterian Church in Zelienople. And I was, we completely transformed in that church. That church had been in 25 years of decline when I first came there. It was in really bad shape. Over the course of my time there, we did $2.5 million of expansions, renovations, purchasing properties around us. We almost tripled the size of the membership and doubled the size of the attendance. And the reason why was we began to integrate other ideas. One of the things we did every year, starting in 2001, is we would take our whole worship committee and go visit churches that were doing something different so that we could bring ideas back in. We started doing presentation stuff in 2003. We started live streaming in 2010. We bought all the equipment for it in 2008, and it took us 2 years to figure out how to use it because we couldn't find anybody who could tell us how to do it. And one of the things I'm proudest of is when the pandemic hit, and everybody had to switch to live streaming, my successor and really good friend, David Paul, was able to lead Calvin Church not to live stream. They're already doing it. They added 4 cameras and a green room to create an incredibly professional style of worship for a year and a half or more online. We really began to integrate ideas. And one of the things I'm really proudest of right now is not only did we grow, but we inspired a number of people to go into ministry. Right now, 8 people from Calvin Church went into ministry. One of them is here. I'm going to pick on you, but Caroline Baker graduated from here last year and won the preaching prize here. We've also had, stand up and take a bow. We've also, any of you in Pittsburgh Presbyterian know Ralph Lowe, who is my best friend and also an elder at Calvin Church. Ralph Lowe came out of Pittsburgh Seminary. Lori Gehring, who's now in Shenango Presbytery at First Presbyterian Church in Newcastle, came out of our church. Stephen Kramer, who was at Crossroads Presbyterian, came out of our church. I've got 4 so far. I've got 2 others that came here. We also had Janet, and I don't know why I'm forgetting Janet's name, but she's an OBGYN also, and she's up in Shenango Presbytery. She came out of here, and there's one other I'm not remembering. But then we've also had some who've gone elsewhere, like Kelsey Jones and also Eliza Kramer. We had a great thing. We got to ordain Stephen and Eliza Kramer, father and daughter, both together at Calvin Church when they both went into ministry. We transformed because we looked at different things. Same thing when I went to Samaritan. Samaritan as a counseling center has been there for a long time. Really good counseling center, but they were really struggling. They were in triple-digit deficits. And I went to Samaritan. I felt called, but I don't know why God put me there. And when I came in there and realized they had such a deficit, my whole thing was, why the heck am I here? I don't know what I'm doing. And I said that regularly to my staff. I don't know what I'm doing. You all know what you're doing. But I did know how to do one thing. When you don't know what you're doing, you go find people who do. So we got myself and one of our board members, we went to our national association, and I said, give us the 5 best counseling centers in the organization. And we talked to the 5 executive directors there, and I talked to 4 others from around the country. Our clinical director talked to clinical directors from around the country. Our director of operations talked to operations people in counseling centers around Pittsburgh. And we got together over a 2-month period and put together a matrix that at the end has led us to go from 5,000 sessions a year now to about 11,000 sessions a year. It's allowed us to branch out and do even more. And what it's done is it's not only increased and wiped out the deficit, but we've actually been able to increase our therapist salaries by about 20 to 25%. It's not a matter whether you know what you're doing. It's a matter of whether you can find people who can guide you on what to do. It's what I do at Samaritan now with my caring for clergy and congregation stuff. I work one-on-one with pastors from all different denominations. About 50% are in the Pittsburgh area. The rest are across the country in places like Michigan. I'm trying to think all the different places, Michigan, Florida, California. And I even have a client in Canada and another one in Australia. And what I work with them on is how do they open up to new ideas. We also do workshops. And by the way, I'm going to invite you to a workshop. May 30th, because this is one of the things that we do. We do workshops at Samaritan to teach pastors and churches how to do things that typically they're not going to learn in seminaries or denominations. So we're doing one on May 30th, the morning of Thursday, May 30th, on nurturing God experiences in the church. If you would like to be part of that, just let me know. With more than, and it's the second go around, because the first go around, the people in there said you need to do this again for other people. We do a small group, which Emily has been part of, Diane has been part of, for Presbyterian pastors on leadership that has been going since 2016. And I consult with churches and also with judicatories. Dawn's here. I just finished up an 18-month consultation with Kiski Presbytery on how do we look differently? How do we integrate different ideas? Because that, to me, that has become my passion, is how do we help the churches to turn around? How do we help the churches to grow? So, as an ending, I'm going to kind of give you the 35 things that actually help churches to grow. I'll whittle it down to 5. Number 1, churches, people, Christians grow when they experience God. How many of you came to seminary because it made rational sense? How many came to seminary because you had some kind of experience that led you here? People grow by the experience of God. In churches, we have to ask the question, are we offering an experience of God or something else? I've been meeting with a former student of mine here at Pittsburgh Seminary. I'm not going to share his name because I didn't get permission, but he and I have been meeting for years. I told him I wasn't going to be his coach because we knew each other too well, but I would meet with him once a month for coffee. And we've been talking about these experiences of God. In 2023, he decided this is going to be the year my church experiences God. So he changed his whole approach to start offering experiences. And the first month he said, Graham, it was amazing. People just started showing up. Not only that, but it's got the whole congregation so juiced that the synod, our synod, just did an article on him and our church. Oops, I just shared who he is. They just did an article on their transformation of what they're about to do in their sanctuary. I'm kidding about that. He didn't have a problem with me talking about this. But Jordan Rimmer, who's up in Shenango Presbytery, they just did an article on his church and the transformation that's going on because he took an approach saying, I want people to have an experience of God every Sunday. Second thing, this is something I learned from non-denominational churches. And it's not the way Presbyterians think. Worship is your primary mission. Worship is your primary mission. That is the place people really meet God. When we think of mission always as something out there, we're actually not creating the opportunity for people to be transformed right here. And our worship services, if they're not transforming, they're not going to make a difference. Worship is mission, which leads to the next thing, which is, it's what Sheila talked about. It's all about transformation. How many of you are exactly the same way you were 35 years ago? We undergo constant transformation. And the same thing is true in our churches. If we are not helping people constantly undergo transformation, what we do won't make a difference. Next, ministry and mission have to be grounded in call. It's not about what would be good to do. It's about what God's calling us to do. At Calvin Church, I almost never talked about mission, and yet Calvin Church is incredibly missionally active because what we said was, listen for what God's calling you to do and respond, and that creates mission. Final thing, or I can keep going with the other 30. Well, we'll take a vote of that. Final thing, my client in Australia suggested a book to me 8 years ago that it took me 6 years to read. It's a book called The Grace Outpouring by a guy named Roy Godwin. And he is a guy in Wales who became the executive director of a retreat center, Faldy Brennan. And basically he said, I want this to be a house of prayer. And I want prayer to be our focus. And what happened was when he got that place to be a house of prayer, people just started showing up. People would pull in the driveway, come to the kitchen and say, what is this place? And he said, well, we're a retreat center. Well, what do you do? Well, we pray. And he said, well, why are we here? And he would say, I don't know. Why? He said, well, we were driving by and we felt like we had to come here. Presbyterians don't pay enough attention to how the Spirit can work, but it's unleashed through prayer. The key thing, and this is what I want to leave you with, is what he really says is the most important thing. It's not just prayer, but become people of blessing. Look at our primary mission as going out and blessing people, as being people through whom everybody, when they meet with us, talk with us, feel that they've been blessed. So that's how I want to close right here before we move to the next one, is just to say a prayer of blessing over all of you. Gracious God, just be a blessing here. Every single person here is somebody who has responded to your call. They are people who have been blessed by you, and they are people who are called to be a blessing to others. And so, Lord, I pray that you would be with them, that you would flow through them, that you would allow them, especially when they're not aware of it, to bless other people. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you.
Our third speaker this morning is the Distinguished Alum in Academia, the Dr. Kenneth Yount, and we are really pleased to have you here, and we're glad to hear from you about your understandings and care for the world, for the church, for all the places that you've been.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We had a wonderful time yesterday. I took my 2-minute limit seriously, so I missed a few shout-outs. I have 15 minutes today, and I'm going to use those. And I had 11 family members last night at the dinner here. We made up about 10% of the audience. My brother and nieces and wife and children and grandchildren and all sorts of things. There are 4 diehards still here this morning in the front row. It's my daughter Sarah and my wife Carol, my grandson Jacob, and my daughter Katie. So it's so glad that they are here. Lots of good friends here, old and new. So thankful to Melissa yesterday and Carolyn, of course, and to Dr. Lee and, of course, Michael for that wonderful introduction. And so happy to be here. And, of course, obviously, Joseph, who has said I have 15 minutes to talk about my life and my journey and where God was interacting with it. And so that I will try to do. And I guess the best place to start is that God was everywhere in and through all of it, all for the last 76 years. Everywhere as my life unfolded. From a very young age, I wanted to have a life of Christian service. And I deliberately and intentionally knew that I wanted to go to college, but I wanted only a Christian or church-related college and didn't look at any of the state schools. It didn't interest me. It wasn't part of where I saw myself being called. There was one problem. Many of you know that private Christian education costs more. My family had no money, and I had no money. I scraped and saved during my childhood, and when I was a senior, second semester in high school, I counted up everything I had saved, and it was $17. That didn't look hopeful. And then one day, it was March 28th, 1965, before many of you were born, I got a letter in the mail. Congratulations, you have been named a National Merit Scholar. This award is for $6,000. So now I had $6,017. So things are starting to look up a little bit. I went forward in faith. I went to college. I still had to work hard to pay for lots of other things. I was fortunate to graduate with a 4.0 average as valedictorian, student newspaper editor, and president of the student body, so things are picking up. And I wanted to go to seminary. I applied to one seminary. I had money to have a missions fee to one seminary, so I had to do my research first, and it was Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. In the Master of Religious Education program for someone who wants to do educational work at a religious-based institution or college, not into the Christian ministry, but to do a Christian ministry through education. So it was a perfect program for that. Here's the problem. It's 1969 now, and I'm absolutely penniless. I had gotten through college but had no money. I had a wife, and I had a little baby on the way. February 24th, 1969, I got 2 letters in the mail. One was from Joseph Small, Director of Admissions at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, saying that I was admitted. That's problem number 1 solved. The same day came a letter from President Donald G. Miller. By the way, I still have both these letters. And Dr. Donald Miller, the president said, and I quote from the letter, "At a meeting of the admissions committee yesterday, you were unanimously and enthusiastically admitted to the student body of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary." Then came the second paragraph. "We have 6 full scholarships at Pittsburgh Seminary. You will receive one of those." So it was a big wow moment. That took care of the first year. But I did my work very hard that year, learned a lot. This is God working in a person's life. But I had to earn money elsewhere too, because as all of you know, in seminary, if your tuition fees are paid, that's half the battle. I had a wife to get food for, a baby to get milk for. I had to come up with $50 a month for rent for Fulton Hall, for my apartment in Fulton. $50, where would I get that for monthly rent? And Pittsburgh Theological Seminary hired me to do anything and everything. I worked, as Walter does here now, in custodial work. I did night watchman. Not that I was a very intimidating watchman. That was 50 pounds ago. And I also, they said, we have another job, will you take this on? I said, of course. They said, we just poured the cement on all these sidewalks. Will you stand and watch them so that nobody puts graffiti in them till they dry? They said, we'll pay you $1.60 an hour. I said, okay. And so I did that too. Eventually I got a job cleaning Al Heil's laundromat on Penn Avenue. It was a pretty long walk. I had no car. But he paid $1.60 an hour, 8:45 to 11:45 p.m., 6 nights a week, every night but Sunday. And so that was $4.80 a night, and I did it, and then walked home at midnight. And that included cleaning public toilets. Sometimes if you're wondering where God's leading you, think about that. And after a few weeks, I said, this doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Are there any chances for advancement? He said, yes. If you stick with me for 6 weeks, I'll give you a toilet brush. So that's the first false thing I've said so far. But then I would leave there at midnight, and Pittsburgh winter, 0 degrees, walking home the mile plus, get home after midnight, and then I had a baby to take care of or help take care of during the night. Then invariably, 8 a.m., I would have a Greek quiz or test with Professor Jameson, who was the dean of the seminary and an outstanding professor in Greek. I still remember more Greek than should be in a head for someone that doesn't use it. Well, I graduated, and I wanted to teach at a church-related college. And again, I never considered it a state school, so that made my mission harder. That required a doctorate, which meant more years of poverty and struggle. And so I did something that seems almost impossible. I became a full-time newspaper editor, again, 6 days a week, and a full-time doctoral student simultaneously in 2 cities 20 miles apart. Before virtual learning, you had to be there all the time. And so that was a lot of work. And one of the newspapers was in Fairmont, West Virginia, which my new friends, the Robinsons, will know. And I worked there 6 nights a week, went to West Virginia University. One advantage there was that the Pittsburgh Pirates, in reaching out to the press, sent me a season ticket, which included field, dugout, and clubhouse privileges. So I got to hang out with Bill Mazeroski and then all the Pirate stars, back when there were lots of Pirate stars, quite a few of them. In 1974, I was hired at Alderson Broaddus College, a Baptist school in West Virginia. I didn't know I would stay there very long, but it was 38 and a half years, which is pretty long. And I was a full professor. I loved it. People asked me what I taught, and it was 35 subjects over the curriculum. If it's in the curriculum, basically, I taught it. I became provost and vice president for academic affairs, and short-term twice acting president, just while the president was out of the country for a while. I went to a meeting of the Appalachian College Deans my first year, and I went to breakfast. The way we went to breakfast this morning, I mingled with people. Then we had our business meeting, and somebody mentioned my name and said, I nominate him to be on the Fellowship Grants Committee. I mean, I'm just brand new. And so I was elected, and I took that, and we had millions of dollars, mostly of Mellon money, which is only fair since my wife worked at Mellon Bank here and didn't get paid. I knew they were putting the money somewhere. I had millions of dollars to work with. And so I had this committee, and it was some of the big universities. By the way, the organization, Appalachian College Association, is 5 states: West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. So we would have big university people there, deans from University of Virginia and WVU and University of Kentucky and so forth. And then also was represented by smaller schools. And we used this money for faculty development grants. So many people got sabbatical leaves and travel money and all sorts of things with that. So I go back the next year, and one of the members said they nominated me to be the chair of the committee, of the fellowship grant committee. So then I was in charge of these millions of dollars. And then the third year I went back, and there was this Dean, Virginia McKinley from Warren Wilson in North Carolina, and she said, I nominate him to be the chair of the deans of the Appalachian College Association for the 5 states. And so now I'm doing that. And so again, I'm thinking my path is generally upward from the public toilets at this point, and things are looking brighter. But it was the classroom that I wanted, and even after being the dean, I went back to the classroom. I loved my students. They returned the favor and 7 times chose me for the Outstanding Professor of the Year at the college, which I loved, the students loved, the faculty not so much. 4 times they nominated me statewide for Outstanding Professor in West Virginia. 3 of the times I was a finalist, and 1 time I was the state runner-up, but never the Professor of the Year for West Virginia, but state runner-up. At least that was a $2,500 award. In the midst of all this, I traveled to all the states, all the provinces of Canada, Europe. I took all 3 of my daughters to Europe, and they've been back. They spent a semester in Europe. When in 4th, you were in 4th and you were in 5th grade. Life-changing experiences, traveling all over the continent. Eventually, we got to all 7 continents with many adventures. Attended audiences with Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, up and close, a mass with the Pope. I met the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The President of the United States invited me into his home and gave me a one-on-one conversation for one of the 12, next week 13 books that I've written. And so my children, grandchildren, sons-in-law all have gotten to take time in Europe, including semesters in Europe for grandchildren, which was transformational for all of them. There we stayed many years. A lot of years I taught in the United States in the spring and in Europe in the fall. And we stayed in a private pension. It was run by a guy by the name of Johannes Vecta. And I thought, I've heard the name Vecta before in World War II history. And then after 3, 4, 5 times there, I found out his grandfather was Otto von Vecta, who was Hitler's governor for the Ukraine, Poland, and northern Italy at the time they were protecting Mussolini. Not exactly what you want to hear, but I must say through him, we got to know a lot of people in Austria. And among these was Andreas Graf zu Stolberg, heir to the Habsburg throne. And I came to be a friend of his. And when he died, he got to send out 150 announcements of the death of this Habsburg heir. And I got a call from Europe saying, he wants you to be one of the 150 people that gets this. We got to know through him Ernst Florian Winter, who was the son of the Austrian government in exile, the son of the mayor of Berlin, and was married to one of the von Trapp daughters, for real, as in The Sound of Music. And not only am I meeting these, but I'm taking my students. Okay, today would you like to go into the house of the heir to the Habsburg throne and meet him and talk to him? Yes. And while we were there, the Duke of Bavaria walked through with his cape flowing, and all that was his cousin. So lots and lots of experiences like that. Much of our foreign travel was in mission work. My wife and I went to Thailand. She did as much of the leadership as I did. And we tried to work and visit and give hope and song and money to places like the Lahu Baptist Church, the Chiang Mai International Church, the House of Love, which was for HIV victims, including orphans that were caused by AIDS. We went to the McCain Rehabilitation Center and tried to support them. That was for leprosy victims. And to the New Life Center, where beautiful young Thai girls have been rescued from brothels and taken there to teach skills to. And we supported them financially and brought hope and encouragement from the United States. We went to a place called the Center for the Uplift of the Hill Tribes. And my wife will remember that, way back in the jungle in northern Thailand. And we got to visit the men's dorm. And the men's dorm and women's dorms were about half the size of this room, one for each. Straw mats on the floor where they slept. Cubicle boxes on the walls where all of their life possessions were. And they got fed rice meals twice a day. And so we supported them and encouraged them. In Bolivia, we tried to spread help everywhere, including monetary donations, but as you know, it's much more than that. And we went early on, day 2, to Toro Toro, which is a village of 2,500 indigenous people in the caldera of an extinct volcano, with dinosaur tracks all up the hillside, as clear as if it happened yesterday, in the molten lava that they had run away from. And so this place is almost inaccessible. We built our roads as we went there, throwing branches into gullies, driving through streams of what I would call quicksand. I mean, the cars got bogged down, driving through riverbeds back and forth. And we got there and delivered big bags of rice and toys and gifts, and we spoke to them and encouraged them. Also there, I was told I would be the minister for the Sunday morning service, the preacher, at the biggest Protestant church in a city of over 1 million people, Cochabamba. And by the way, please give it in Spanish. So I did that, and we did that as we went around to various places there. India is quite a story. My wife and I led the first group of Westerners into Nagaland in 25 years. That's in extreme northeastern India, hard on the border with Myanmar and near Bangladesh and Bhutan and all those places. 97% of the people in that state of India are Christian. I don't think a lot of Americans know that, but they were cut off from the world, and we were the first outsiders in 25 years, and people asked us later, how did you get in? They were in a war situation, both a civil war and a war with the Indian government, and it was very unsafe. We had a military escort front and back of us as we traveled, and when we would arrive in a town, soldiers would fan out around us to form a defensive perimeter, and there would be friendly snipers on the tops of all the buildings. You could see them with their rifles. We got to Kohima, which is almost through India, almost to Myanmar, a city of 60,000 people. And there we were celebrating 125 years of Christianity. And they said, we need to caution you, the hotel you're staying in is the best one, but recently a truck backfired. The Indian Army mistook it for a gunfire, opened fire on your hotel, killed 18 people and injured more than 50. So you need to be aware of that. And also, we had a bus. We were trying to get to the soccer stadium. We backed into an alley. There was tremendous anxiety, and they were trying to get us out because they said just recently a bomb went off in that spot. So we got to the soccer stadium, and there were 100,000 people in it, in a city of 60,000 people. Tens of thousands of people had walked for days up the Himalayan foothills and through the jungle. And my job is to speak and encourage and welcome them and give greetings from the people of the United States to 100,000 people. And people said, isn't that intimidating? And I said, no, after the first 50,000, it really doesn't matter how many more are there. But the soccer stadium was filled, and the entire playing field was filled with folding chairs, and there were just people as far as you can see. And one time in the post-pandemic era, this seems foolish. One day I thought, okay, they came here mostly to learn about Jesus and to worship. They also came with some interest in seeing an American. So I went to the entryway and I just stood there and shook hands with everybody that came through. And as I think about that in the post-pandemic era, that seems foolish, but I shook thousands of hands. Then we went to the military cemetery, and my wife and I were there, and group photos kept forming and reforming as we walked. Everybody wanted a picture because it had been 25 years since anyone there had seen anyone that looked anything like us, if that's even possible. We went to a place called Dimapur, and there was a Christian mission compound being dedicated. I'm there sitting in my folding chair, trying to survive the afternoon heat. I said, "Who's the speaker for this?" And they said, what do you think they said? You are. So that's part of work in even short-term foreign missions, I guess. Later, my wife and I and my brother, not the brother that came last night, but another one, paid fully to put a Naga girl through seminary. So we wanted to continue to try to help. And we did send fairly sizable donations to try to do what we could where we can. So that's my story. I'm still active at age 76. Last year I got named Poet Laureate again, this time for our county in West Virginia. Writing books, one will be finished in a week or two. Still traveling Canada as soon as the book is done. And grateful so much again for Dr. Lee and for Carolyn and for Melissa and Michael and Joseph and all the many friends, old and new, that we encountered here at our seminary. Thank you, and God bless.
Favorite things about Alumni Days is to hear how God is active in the many different places that God is active. And this panel just shows that, from a playground scrap to a presbytery meeting that needs to reconfigure itself, to folding chairs on a football field. And God is active in all of that. And I love that about Alumni Days, to hear these stories and to see where our God is around and active and calling us into relationship with each other. So thank you, all three of you, for your inspiring stories. What sort of questions do you have?
I have a question for Dr. Standish. You said churches grow when people experience God. What are you trying to tell us when you say that? Because obviously we can't manufacture God's presence, right? Or the Spirit's movement. So what is it that you are saying when you say we want people to experience God in our church?
You know, the thing that when I'm working with pastors and churches, I say is, and let's just use worship, are you being intentional, or are you merely being traditional or imitational? Traditional is we're doing the same thing all the time, and we're just doing it because that's what we've always done. Or we're being imitational when we say, well, they're doing this down the street, or they're doing this somewhere, and they're attracting a lot of people, we ought to do it. Being intentional is paying attention to where people are spiritually. For example, when you hear people say, I'm spiritual but not religious, we tend to say, well, they're lazy, they stay home, blah, blah, blah. What I hear is them saying, you're religious but not spiritual. Not you in particular, but in general. Everything we do in the church has been created at some point to create experience. The foundation of the Protestant movement was, we want you to be able to read Scripture for yourself. I just got back from Spain. The whole cathedrals in Spain were never designed for people to understand Scripture or read it for themselves. Cathedrals are set up so that the preacher preaches to the religious and the members just watch. The thing that was amazing was people reading scripture for themselves and experiencing God. Same thing is true today. People aren't experiencing God in our churches, and you can see it by the number of people that have left. And so one of the things we did at Calvin Church is we started paying attention to the people who weren't there. I would say about 20% of our members were people who had walked away from church and started coming back to us because we started changing. And we did a lot of different things. We didn't just have traditional hymns, we integrated contemporary, and we integrated Taizé, and we integrated times of silence. The music director there, Bruce Smith, does this wonderful thing where every Sunday after worship in the postlude, he does some kind of popular song in jazz version, and it relates to some event in the previous week, and half the congregation stays to listen to try to figure out what they're doing. I mentioned Jordan. Jordan did communion a couple weeks ago where he had communion and he set up a table that was a feast. And he had freshly baked bread in the service where they were baking it, and they used that. It's paying attention to how we integrate mind, body, spirit, relationships, all of that. So it's not that we manufacture it, but what we do is we create opportunities for it. And it's being intentional.
This will be for all three of you. In your various areas of expertise post-COVID, how has your ministry areas changed in education, in ministry and mission, specialized ministries? How have they changed so that you can show, or you can give opportunities for the people that you encounter to experience God in a different way?
I could answer briefly and then turn it over to the experts. I was already retired at the time COVID came along, and what it did was slow down our international travels. I spent much more time sitting and writing books, so it switched me more to writing books. I've been doing about one per year, but really I think the other two probably have much more relevant answers.
Well, in a couple of ways. Prior to COVID, our local congregation and also the Baptist Ministers Conference did not have a virtual presence at all. And so what it did was it changed our methods and our methodologies. Because methods change, mission remains the same. And so, for instance, at our local congregation, we had to do a summer youth employment program partially online and then partially in person. Our time of worship changed. Now we have a worship weekend as opposed to a worship hour. So on Saturday at 5 o'clock, we have worship from 5 to 6. On Sunday, we have 3 different platforms for worship, and it's all virtual. With the Baptist Ministers Conference had its first revival online virtually. So we had revivals virtually online, Martin Luther King observance virtually online. And then like now during the endemic, we still have Martin Luther King observance online as opposed to in person. And then our citywide revival, which happened last week, we have in person. So our methodologies changed. Our small groups were online, and some are still online. And the thing in our local congregation that changed the most was that we had intense integration of our sick and shut-in with our congregation and with those from other states, because we intentionally had small groups online. So those are some of the things that have changed. I don't know how long it's going to be like this, but hey, it's working.
I will say, being the executive director of a counseling center, Archbishop of Canterbury in the 1920s, William Temple said, "I notice that when I pray, coincidences happen. When I stop praying, coincidences stop happening." We were so blessed as a counseling center. Our clinical director, Susan Yount, who's just absolutely fantastic and unfortunately retiring, she was already certified in video therapy. So she was able to train all of our therapists in 3 days. So our adjustment was really quick. So let me tell you what I noticed in the churches. Everybody went through trauma trying to adapt. A lot of churches at the end of the pandemic said, can we get rid of that stuff and go back to the way we were? Those churches are struggling. Tremendous number that adapted. What I'm noticing with a number of the pastors I'm working with, they adapted and they continued. And one of the things I'm starting to hear as I'm talking to pastors is all of a sudden we're getting people starting to show up at our church. We put in a membership class of 30, or we put in a membership class of 18. One pastor I talked to said, we haven't really brought members in a decade, and all of a sudden we're getting 15, 20. I think what the pandemic did was it forced everybody to adapt who wouldn't adapt. And those who've held to it, they're starting to reap the benefit, because there are people longing for God, and they're now starting to come to churches, and they're open to the possibility of maybe finding God there. So that to me, that's actually a positive of the pandemic that most of us haven't paid enough attention to.
Are there any questions online?
There's one back.
This will be the last question, and then we'll break for going to chapel.
I have a two-part question. The first part is specifically for Reverend Dr. Johnson, and then the second part is for all three of you, if that's all right. Dr. Johnson, you mentioned your mentor model of having someone older than you, a peer, and a younger person, and I'd love if you could just speak for a moment. Was one of them mentoring you and you were mentoring others, or were they all mentoring you? What did that look like structurally? And then the second part for all of you is, when you have had mentors or looked for mentors, what do you look for in a mentor?
Okay, my mentorship model, one older than me, basically is three persons that are older than I am in terms of ministry. I have one that's a musician in Tucson, and I have another one that's a pastor in Pittsburgh, and then I have another one that's a retired professor that mentor me. And anytime I have any issue or I don't understand what's down the road, we typically touch base at least once a month. Those are the three persons that I have for me. Peer-wise, I also have another person that's peer-wise, but I also mentor someone that is my peer. And then in terms of younger than myself, I have I have three musicians that I'm mentoring now, and in addition to that, I have two who are in higher ed that I'm mentoring now.
For my own part, I look for people as mentors who see education as a ministry, not a job, not a profession, not teaching a subject, but molding people and helping build lives.
Was this the second question? Oh, okay, sorry. I've had a lot, but they've never all come from the same place. The first one was Jack Hodges, who was the senior pastor I worked with as an associate pastor. And I came in, basically when I went into ministry, I said, I don't want to learn from my mistakes. I want to learn from someone else's. It's too painful to learn from my mistakes. So I got to work with a pastor who was fantastic. I mean, he was a great friend. Also got to work with another friend, Candace Hill, who was our Christian Ed director, and they both were mentors to me. Also, when I studied at Duquesne, there's a guy named Adrian Von Kamm, only genius I've ever met. He's written 52 books. He started the program, the Institute of Formative Spirituality at Duquesne. He's not a particularly great writer, which is why people don't know about him, but just phenomenal. And he really shaped my life in so many ways. But it's also adding a lot of people I've worked with. The one, by the way, seminary student I forgot that I need to mention, Caroline, how the heck could we forget Connie? Connie Frierson, who came here and was a top student here, actually ended up becoming our associate pastor at Calvin Church and one of my best friends. And she herself is a phenomenal pastor, but Connie has been also a mentor to me. Ralph Lowe has been a mentor to me, as I have been for him, and that's more peers. But so I've had the opportunity to have mentors big and small. And I think that's also, I've always been part of small groups, leadership groups. And, you see in front of you Diane and Emily, who are part of it, and they have been fantastic because some of the discussions we've been able to have, they don't know that it's impacted me because I have a poker face about that, but it does. And it's just that constant relationship going on that some are obvious and some aren't.
All right, thank you again to the three panelists, and we appreciate your time with us.